What do you want to be as far as a human body? What is your role at age 50? Everything that you've learned in your life that you may want to impart on others. What is the right vehicle for you to use everything that you've learned to help others? We're living at a time that we're necessary, we're needed, so that we can tell a story of what worked for us and let the newer generation digest it and see how they can make it work for them.
Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours.
Hi, all, and welcome to the next chapter with Charlie. We're so glad to have you with us. Our very special guest today is Mario Cartaya, born in Havana, Cuba in 1951. That makes him almost my age, except I'm his senior by 2 years. In 8 years after the turbulent, let me start over again. He was born in Havana, Cuba in 1951. 8 years later, the turbulent winds of change forced his family to immigrate to the United States in search of a new life lived in freedom. 56 years later, Mario returned to Cuba in search of his long-forgotten memories of childhood. Now a successful architect, this once unsung child of the Cuban diaspora went back to face his old enemies, who, as it turns out, were no longer there, and to recall his earliest experiences. In his book, Journey Back into the Vault, Mario confronts the contents of the mental lockbox he had built to protect him from his challenging past. I love the mental lockbox idea. Mario's personal story is a universal one. How love and enlightenment can only begin with a search for self-actualization and peace of mind. With that, let's bring Mario Cartaya on the show. Mario, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to come on your show.
Well, we're so excited to have you. You have such a fascinating story. And I was thinking, why don't we start our show today with whatever comes to your mind when I ask you in sort of one paragraph to sort of just give me an overview of your life story, and then we're going to get into the details.
Okay. Born in Cuba to a middle-class family, half of which were accountants and the other half were musicians. I grew up using both sides of my brain. And I grew up knowing that my future was going to be to honor the education that my family had always achieved, and then the success that they had always achieved. Little did I know that my father's accounting business would be attacked by the new revolution in search of his journals with the properties of all of his American clients on the island. When my father refused to give it to them, then they took him away in detention. Along the way, to make a long story short, Che Guevara told him, you better give me those documents or else things are going to get really bad for you. And then after you give me those documents, I want you guys to leave the island as soon as you can. So fortunately, my father's life was spared. Unfortunately, we had to leave Cuba in 1960.
Sort of a forced exile.
Yeah, so I came to the United States and I never gave up on my dream of becoming an architect. I did. I graduated from the University of Florida, max cum laude, and then later I passed my exam and I started my architectural business in 1978, and I had it up until I sold it 43 years later in 2022. Then
now, you've done some major projects with your architectural firm, have you not?
Yes, sir. And then I became a writer, and here I am with you guys.
Tell me, I have a couple of questions. Hold this in the background. This is the primary question is, I want to know more just a little bit more, tell our audience a little bit more about some of your architectural accomplishments. But before I do that, I got to tell you, in the 1960s in the United States, I went to college in 1967, and I was a hippie. And so I was an anti-war, peace, yep, peace and love, all that
That's right.
stuff. And Che Guevara, for us, was a hero. But you tell a very different story. See, we just have the highlighted, wonderful revolutionary, but you talk about a guy that was really not so much about revolution. I mean, not as much about revolution as he was about curtailing his own people. Tell me more about Che.
Well, it was about revolution. Che was a communist, a Marxist Leninist, and he went to Cuba looking to change his reputation as a person who did, not a person who preached it, but a person who was a revolutionary. So he joined Castro. They both went to Cuba. They attacked the government of Batista, and then they stay in power. The revolution was not a peaceful revolution. It was not a revolution based on ideals. It was a revolution based at the end of a gun. So it was a war. And as part of the war, then criminal acts occurred. Che was one of those guys that could not make the differentiation between war as the end result of the revolution or the end result of a peaceful exchange of ideas. So he became a criminal. A lot of people died under his gun when they
No
refused to
kidding.
comply. Now, thankfully, my father was not one of them. And for that, I am thankful.
That's great. And all of those, no wonder all of those memories before you returned to Cuba, all of those memories were gone with you.
Yeah, what my body did, which is the interesting part of the whole story, right? I came from Cuba, I had just turned 9 years old. And I arrived here, and the day that we left, we're looking over our shoulders to see if at any moment my father is going to be detained again. And this time they're going to kill him, right? We knew because that was happening everywhere. People would disappear and they would never come back, right? During that time, life was what was cheap in Cuba in 1960, right after the revolution. So I come here and I began to really suffer thinking about the family I left behind. I may or may not ever see them again. And so then my subconscious took all those memories that were tormenting me and it placed them inside this lockbox that I call the vault. Journey back into the vault the vault is not Cuba. The vault is the one that we all carry, where our subconscious protects us from those old memories to allow us not to live in the past, but to actually search for your future. In my case, it worked. I became a well-known architect, what I always wanted to be, until one day I realized, even with all these awards that you see behind me, even with all of that, what is missing? And I realized I don't know anything about who I am. I know who I became, but I didn't know who I was. So I need to go back and see what I find.
For our listeners who are in sort of the same position, what did you gain by learning more about your childhood?
Everything.
How's
Everything.
that? That's
Because of
fascinating.
the cultures, right? Why did I become an architect? Let's start with that one. Why did I become an architect? And all the memories came back of my father working with me, making me help him in his office so I could learn a little bit about what being an accountant was. Because my father was an accountant, my uncle was an accountant, my grandfather from the Cartaya side was an accountant, so on. So he's teaching me what the family in his side has done for generations. It's important that we be responsible for the money, right? And what I do is help people become responsible with what they use with their earnings, right? So I kind of learned that from him, but then I would come home and it was very different. It was all the arts. My grandfather would always ask me to play with three-dimensional toys. He would always ask me to paint. So I grew up with that duel, right? No wonder I became an architect because I was exposed to beauty as well as responsibility when designing a building, right? And I kind of gravitated towards, I never knew why I wanted to be an architect in such an early age. Now I know. And a lot of other things. Some of the words that I use when I speak in Spanish with my friends, some of the things that I felt, some of the dreams that were like without context, all that became known to me. So now I know the first 9 years of my life, who I was, what I was hoping to do with my life, what I thought that my destiny was, and then how it all changed. But yet, those early Marios still stayed with me. I just didn't feel them. I didn't know they were there until I went and poof, the siren song exposed them to me.
Fascinating, fascinating. Why don't you tell, I think it would be really good for our listeners to know just exactly what kind of architect you were, and then we're going to get deeper into your your story. But what are some of the buildings that you've done? I mean, you told me the buildings. I said, "Oh my goodness, this guy's built half of the government buildings and airports in Florida."
Well, and in other places too. But why did I get to do those buildings? In order to do those buildings, you must be respected because of your design prowess, right? And I never knew why I did what I did, but every building that I would design, I would talk to the building. Why? Because buildings.
You would literally, would it be verbal or were you
Oh no, I didn't talk, and they
just
talked
in your
back.
mind?
But
Okay.
in my
I mean,
mind,
because some people do act, they will physically talk to something.
well, I haven't gotten to that age yet. Maybe I will, but in my mind, I would ask the building, "What do you want to do? What do you want to be?" And the purpose is that every building is not just block and wood and stucco and metals and air conditioning. Every building is necessary because there's a need for it. Those that want to worship need a place to worship. The place to worship has to inspire them to worship. Those who are going to court need justice. But what else does that building want to do? When I did the Broward County Courthouse, it's a 27-story courthouse that has all three branches of law, right? Civil, criminal, and family. I didn't know what it wanted to be. I'll tell you this story real quick. And what does this building want to be? Of course, a place that justice is rendered is the first thing that happened, but that's going to happen there anyways. The building has no control over justice. The lawyers and the judges do. But what can the building control? And I went to speak with the head judge for family courts just to see if that could generate some kind of a concept. And while I'm there, there's this lady waiting who's no more than her late 30s. And she's sitting there just minding her own business, reading a book, looking so peaceful in an office structure. And here comes this guy who's shackled in the wrist and in the ankles as well. And this lady got up, her face contorted. She got all bright red. She went and she punched him. And I'm thinking, how can this young lady go from being so peaceful to want to punch someone? So I asked the chief judge, what happened? Well, I can't tell you the specifics that the judge said to me, but he is accused of raping her daughter, their cousin.
My goodness. Oh my goodness. And they're in the same room?
Their cousins. That night, when I went to bed, all that I could think of was watching this woman transform in front of my eyes into a beast and punch the guy. What would cause that? Right? And then it dawned on me. Here's a lady who has never been in trouble in her life, never been in jail, never had to go through the justice system, which is imperfect, as we all know, right?
Of course.
Never had to relive those dark moments that she probably has hidden in her own vault. But yet, somebody came along into her life and destroyed all that by raping the daughter. It's not just her, but also the daughter and the whole family now has to
Oh,
relive
oh,
that. Now have to relive that rape for probably years,
yeah,
while
I
the
can't
system
imagine.
kind of chucks along until finally there is justice. So I told myself, that's it. That's what the building needs to be. The building needs to shelter, take care of these people who lose their innocence. She lost her innocence because of nothing that she did, but what some perpetrator kind of threw upon her life. So now, how do I make this building help her?
That is a, I've got to stop you right there. That's a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
That,
So
that you said, a building, the environment
a
can
building is
change
also human.
everything.
A building is human because it must respond to the humans who need it for the reason that they need it. So what did that building do? How did
Yeah,
I end
but
up behind it?
you look at a different, I know architects that look strictly at the physical,
Exactly.
but
That's not me.
you look at the heart of it.
Yeah.
You're not just going, what is that building about? Which architects will look at, but what it's about to the human soul.
Right.
What is it saying to people? That's a fascinating. That must be your artistic
Well,
side
I'll,
coming
I'll,
alive in
I'll tell
your
you where that comes
architecture.
from. But how did I then resolve that problem? I
Yeah,
gave,
I want to tell us about your
I,
building with the escalators and the
I put
view.
all of the courtrooms beginning in the 8th floor up to the 30th floor. And the waiting area to get into the courtrooms, I gave it to the victims. And they look out at the ocean in Fort Lauderdale. There are
That's
no
beautiful.
elevators for these guys. They get up there to the 8th floor and they're not in elevators, they're in escalators where they never feel confined to a metallic, box. They're out with other people, not confined in a place that they already feel confined, meaning a courtroom, right? And so soft colors, a lot of light blues, light yellows, nothing green, nothing white, nothing black, a lot of wood, a lot of organic
You got
material.
to tell me about nothing green. What does that mean?
Well, green is associated with jail cells.
Oh, is it?
Yes, because
Is it?
that's if you mix everything together, you usually get some sort of a green, right? And so you don't want that. You want the colors that rest the soul, meaning the light yellows, the soft pastel blues, the soft pastel colors that perhaps change a little. But anyways, the building won an international award. So what happened to me is that because of my notoriety, but the fact that my buildings go to the next dimension, which is the human dimension, I began to become known for that. So a lot of clients would come to me because of my reputation as a thinking architect, a philosophical architect that did a lot more than just build block and then paint it. That
That's
thought about the
fascinating.
building as
That is
being
fascinating.
part
No
of
wonder you were
humanity.
successful.
Yeah,
No wonder. And so all of your buildings have that kind of heart and soul put
all of
into
them.
them.
All of them.
That is
What
what
do
that
you
is
want to
what
be?
drives you.
Yeah.
And how did at 51, at 51 years, so you were like what, 59 years old or something when you went to Cuba?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you're 59 years old, so you've done most of your architecture, or much of your architecture has been done by then. How do you see the influence of what you learned in Cuba influencing, when on that trip, you said, this really influenced, I did unconsciously, this influenced my design. Did you find any correlation?
Well, I did, not so much because of the buildings. We'll talk about that in a minute. But my mother was a classical pianist,
Okay.
and she would work with some of Cuba's best composers, including Lecuona, the famous Ernesto Lecuona. And she would always work with them for the harmony. So her left hand, and she would, as she's composing the harmony of the music, I would sit with her, my mom, right? And she would always just kind of mutter to herself, "What do you want to be? What do you want to be?" To tell the story of the harmony. The harmony is saying you, is telling you something, right? The words are telling you something, and the melody goes with the words. However, the harmony tells the story. It's the background. It's the gloom, the doom, the happy, the lighthearted, you know. So what do you want to be? I would hear her say. I didn't remember that until I went to the house and it hit me. I remember my mother always saying, "What do you want to be?" That's where I get it.
That's
Unknowingly.
fascinating.
Unknowingly, I did not remember the moments, but that was already in me. That was already part of my education as an artistic person. What do you want to be? To the
That's,
music.
you know, I wanted, was that your thought? You know, a question I wanted to ask you was after that visit to Cuba, when you returned, what dominated your thinking? Was that it? Was that what dominated your thinking, or was it
Yeah,
something else?
when I came back from Cuba, um, the memories kept coming back. It didn't stop. And the subconscious kept coming out. I'm on a cruise and I'm writing the book. And there's a part in the book where I meet myself. It's towards the end, right?
Which book is this? Is this Revolution or
No,
Vault?
this is a journey back into the vault, right?
Okay. Okay. Yes.
And there's a part there where I'm sitting in the very same spot where my life in Cuba came to an end, with my father asking my family for permission to leave Cuba after telling the story that I told you about his life being threatened by Che Guevara. And I'm watching this at age 8. Very traumatic. And now I know we're leaving, and we're leaving soon, and I'll never see my family, which is all crying in front of me. Imagine being 8 years old, seeing your father cry, seeing your whole family, grandparents, uncle, aunts, crying. A horrible moment, realizing that it's coming to an end, and we have to go. I remember my grandfather coming to my father and saying, "Son, you cannot be a husband to my daughter or a father to my grandchildren if you're dead." Imagine hearing that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Go to the
What
U.S.
stern
and
words.
come back. Go to the U.S. and come back when this nightmare is over. Well, the nightmare has never ended, right? We're still here. Actually, they're all gone now. Everybody's dead, so they're all gone.
You mentioned earlier, maybe in the intro, you talked about that you went and you were looking for the demons who no longer existed, but the demons of your childhood in Cuba. What were those demons that were
I
no
was
longer
afraid
there?
of the demons. Back when I left, my father told me, "Mario, don't tell anyone that we're leaving." He also said, "Mario, don't tell anyone that you're a Boy Scout. Don't tell anyone that your father has a business with American clients." Because the people of Cuba, if they knew that you were a Yankee sympathizer, would yell at you, they will insult you, and in some cases, they would also beat you up. You know, it was a dictatorship coming to power, and people began to react. They needed an enemy, and the enemy became us. Anyone who was a Yankee sympathizer, however they defined it, was the enemy. And so I had to leave very quietly. Never told anyone that I was leaving. I left. So now coming back, those were my last memories of my last days in Cuba. And now I'm coming back. And guess what? Everybody that I met, "Welcome to Cuba." Some would even hug me. "Welcome to Cuba, brother." Very, very different. Those demons of 1960 were long gone. Of course, it's now 56 years later. Times have changed. that was a beautiful thing to understand that not everything lasts forever, and
Yeah,
that hate is gone. It's still gone.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. You know what I want to, focus our time on now is your newest book that was just released yesterday, Before the Revolution, and you have some powerful words.
Here.
What is the subtitle? The Before the Revolution.
It's the untold story of 100 years of friendship between the United States and Cuba.
Now, we don't think about that.
Of course not.
No one thinks about the 100 years of friendship between the United States and Cuba. And tell me about that 100 years of friendship and where we are now.
Well, one thing that I remembered when I was there is how my father's clients, the CEOs of, say, Frigidaire, Sylvania, General Electric, those guys will come to our house. Whenever they
Oh,
came,
big hit, big
whenever they came
clients.
to Cuba to meet with my father about something, they would always come over to have a good Cuban meal prepared by, by my grandmother, who cooked great. And then from there, many times, they would take me to see a baseball game with the Americans and Cubans playing together, right? And I grew up with that kind of image of the Americans. And an American to me as a child was no different than a Cuban, except they spoke English. They liked the same things I like. They like cowboys and Indians. They like rock and roll, and they like baseball. What else is there? To an 8-year-old?
Really, I mean, you just described life's goals. That's just,
Exactly. That we had so much in common. But yet, ever since the revolution took over, everything was not just broken, but ignored and eventually forgotten. That's why after they flew the flag in my honor on top of the US Capitol, they gave me this access to the Library of Congress. I have the same rights as any sitting senator or congressman. So guess
oh, so I
what?
mean, you can see documents I can't see.
I used it. I spent a year, 2 years ago, in the Library of Congress getting information, anything I could find that were documents related to Cuba or Cuba and the United States. And what all that told me was one thing, that there was a friendship. I know today we don't talk about friendship too much because friendship is not a priority in today's generations. However, back then, with the greatest generation, friendship was everything. Trust was everything. You did not need attorneys to make deals. A simple handshake would do. A person's last name became everything. Today, they won't even say your last name. Mr. Mario, Mr. Scott, it's different. But if we can if we can go back to that time and understand what these Cubans and Americans were like, and then understand everything that I documented about freedom and about friendship and about trust, that's what gave way to the Cuban and American relationship that helped both countries. It was not a one-way assistance from the US to Cuba. It was both ways. That surprised me tremendously.
And this is pre-Castro?
Pre-Castro, right?
And
I
when
go
did Castro take over?
in 1959. I go
59.
from I write from 1823 when I found a letter from Thomas Jefferson to John Quincy Adams that changed everything I thought I knew about Cuba and the United States. That one letter.
From Thomas Jefferson.
Exactly. That's the reaction everybody gets. From Thomas Jefferson. I'll tell you what that was real quick. 1823, the Cubans already are talking about having a war of independence against Spain.
Okay.
John Quincy Adams gets notification that they're doing that. Now, his fear that he writes Thomas Jefferson is that if the Cubans do go to war with Spain, it's going to be a different kind of war than Spain has ever fought. It's more of a jungle war in the fields, right? Both countries are going to be decimated. with Spain and Cuba decimated, an opportunity will be open for the English to come back and take over Cuba, and then from there come to Florida, which was still a Spanish colony, and then out all the way to California, which meant that the U.S. would have to refight their war of independence against England. I had never read that before.
I have never heard that.
But there's that letter telling me that he's saying this. I'm reading it. His words.
And it's all about Cuba and Spain, and then
It's all about the
impacting the
war
United
with
States.
Spain, and that both countries will be decimated. The English will come in, take over, and eventually coming to the U.S. mainland, which wasn't U.S. mainland yet. It was all Spanish occupied. And that we should annex Cuba now before that happens. Thomas Jefferson's answer to him was, no, that's a bad idea. Because the Cubans are more like us than you think. They're European expatriates. They're not Indians. They didn't come from the natives. The natives were all killed or they all left. They're Europeans like us. They think like us. They live like us. They're Christians like us. Blah, 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 blah. We're better off being their main trade partner than try to control people who, like us, cannot be controlled.
So how did that impact the war?
Well, the war would eventually happen. The 1840s, the Cubans begin their war. The U.S. joins it for the last 6 weeks of the war when Teddy Roosevelt goes out there after they bombed the U.S. main. And Teddy Roosevelt quit his position as Secretary of the Navy because he wanted to go and take care and help the Cubans who he had befriended through the years, the friendship. So they were there for only 6 weeks. The Spanish-American War in Cuba only lasted 6 weeks. By the time that he got there, what John Quincy Adams said was true. The Cubans were dilapidated, so were the Spanish. They were holding on to one area in Santiago de Cuba. So the Americans came in, joined with the Cuban forces. They planned a siege of that city, and they did it. A few weeks later, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and then Spain gave all their properties to the U.S., Florida, etc. The Philippines, Puerto Rico, all those things fell down. Exactly like John Quincy Adams thought they would. But now, the U.S. is trading with Cuba. In Cuban ports, the English are not going to challenge that. It worked out.
Amazing.
So I can have an argument in the most philosophical of fields, the most academic of fields, that perhaps we need to examine whether with that letter, Thomas Jefferson becomes the father of not just the U.S., but also Cuba. Because there was no annexation talk that ever held in Congress after that letter.
Tell me,
American policy.
Tell me the government, completely unaware of government. Although I've heard the word annex a lot, tell me what you mean by annex.
Annex means that they take over Cuba. It becomes a colony. They would be the new colonizer. They go in there and they say, we will treat you right, but you're a part of us now. You're a territory. Puerto Rico is a territory of the U.S., right? We are a colonizing power still in Puerto Rico, and we control them to a point. And that's what colonizing powers do. So they wanted to annex Cuba, make Cuba an American territory, perhaps even a state someday. But Thomas Jefferson stopped that on a dime. It came up again to Congress one more time. In 1898, after the war ended, there were voices in Congress that said, now let's take it over. But then the Teller Amendment said, it is American policy that the Cuban people are by right meant to be free and sovereign.
The story you're telling me, makes me think of one thing, that no wonder you graduated with high honors in education. You are a student.
Well, thank you.
You
I like to learn.
you want to learn, and you're always wanting to learn. Let's switch to Mario Cartaya, and let's talk about you rather than not so much about Cuba and the United States, but about what you learned, how all this information has impacted your current lifestyle. Did you always? You were a writer now. You've got 2 books, is that right, or more?
Well, I have 3 books. I have Journey Back into the Vault. I have its companion, which is not a translation because you really can't translate something and still talk to the other culture. The cultures
Right.
demand that you rewrite it. Same information, just written a different ways that goes with the culture, right? That's the second book, La Bóveda. The third book is the one that was just published day before yesterday, the 18th.
Day before yesterday.
The 18th, before the revolution, the untold story of 100 years of friendship between the US and Cuba.
How
And
did
that
that? Okay, so what drove you from being an architect to a writer? Did you have a message you wanted to tell, or was it just in your heart you wanted to write?
I got many things I want to tell, right? I can only do one thing at a time. But when imagine me, since I was in high school where I took architectural classes, I've been designing every day, asking myself, what do you want to be? How am I going to design you? What materials am I going to use? Ba, 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 ba. Every day I create something in my life since I was 13, 14 years old, right? Every day I would create something. And then all of a sudden, I sell the company. I need to express myself like any artist. I need to express myself. And Cuba became being there and coming back. When I came back after my trip, all the things that happened to me, right? And they're all in the book. It's very, very explicit in all these miracles that happen. Incredible stuff that happened while I was there. Of course, it's all the mind returning all these memories, all these feelings, all these sounds, smells that I had forgotten. But
And this occurred to you much later in life that you had, because you were so busy being successful, now you have time to ponder your life more
exactly. And so
because you
when
were
I
so
begin,
focused on your business.
so when I begin to write now, this is after I sold my architectural business, I'm writing and I'm asking myself, what does this book want to be? What does this chapter want to be? What does this paragraph need to be? Right?
Those are great questions. I write too, as you may know,
And
those are
that's
great
where
questions for a writer. I've
it's,
never
it's,
heard anybody say that. What does this
it's
book
very
want to
similar.
be?
It's very similar to being an architect. Artistically speaking, my mother asked her piano, what do you want to sound? I asked my buildings, what do you want to be? And now I'm asking what I'm writing. What am I trying to get through? What is this paragraph? And
So
then
you
down
learned that
to
from
what
your
is the
mother.
word. And I'll tell you what I'm playing with now that you get in this book. There's always room to be better. There's never a good enough. There's always be better, right? So now I decided to write, and as I write, the rhythm that you read is a musical rhythm.
That is beautiful. You know what I'm amazed with is that we're very close to the same age. And one of the things I wrestle with at this time, and I've wrestled post-retirement, I've been retired for 15, 16 years, I can't remember. And is, you retire and you have 2 things that really occur to you. One is you have an open calendar, where you used to have a filled calendar, you have an open calendar. And then you have this usefulness question. I once was very useful. I was the coach of, I called myself partner in thought with 5 CEOs of billion-dollar companies. So I had an impact, I worked out this brilliant career where I worked literally half my career, 25 hours a week on business, and then 25 hours a week coaching my son in baseball, who is now a professional baseball player. So it paid off. And and um, and after that, now what do I do with my life? I write. I go to a lot of movies. But you've maintained productivity. I've questioned productivity, but you've maintained productivity. You're being very productive in your retired life because we're close to the same age. And by the way, you look you were so young looking and so young acting. You are nowhere near your age
Well, thank you for
in
that.
your life. People tell me that a lot too. That our voices. Usually at our age, our voices start getting that old age voice,
Yeah.
and we haven't gotten the old age voice. So way to go. But I'm very impressed with what you do, Mario.
Well, thank you so much. I'm impressed with your questions.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I think we've just about run out of time, but I would like to know for my audience is around 40s to 50s. What would you have to say to a 50-year-old who's questioning on living a meaningful life? What would you have to tell them? What words of wisdom do you have?
Well, ask yourself, what do you want to be? But not what do you want to be as far as material. I want to be, no. What do you want to be as far as a human body? What is your role at age 50? Everything that you've learned in your life that you may want to impart on others. What is the right vehicle for you to use everything that you've learned to help others? We're living at a time that we're necessary, we're needed, so that we can tell a story of what worked for us and let the newer generation digest it and see how they can make it work for them. Humanity hasn't changed. We're still the same people all around the world who live and die, who eat, who need clothing, who need, a shelter over their heads, who need love, right? And who need a reason to exist, to get up in the morning and have something to do. All those are qualities that we all have. Everyone. There's not one living person who doesn't have those qualities. The question is, how do you fit into that? What are you going to do with the years you have left now using everything you've learned along the way? We're all special at our age because we all have a history and we all have lessons that we've learned that the younger ones haven't been through yet. So what do you do? What
That
example
is
and how do
beautiful,
you
and that
start?
seems to be through our whole discussion. And let's wrap up with this. But I want to hear your comments on it. That seems to be your theme of this podcast. I'm changing the title of this podcast to "Who Do You Want to Be?"
Yeah.
But you're asking everything. Who do you want to be? So your book. Let's just say the book that just came out 2 days ago. Before the Revolution, or even Journey Back into the Vault. Before you wrote those books, my guess is you were asking those books, what do you want to be?
Absolutely.
That is your question. That is a
Yeah.
question that you offer all of us listening to this. You've offered me, and that is beautiful. And it's memoir that I'm working on. I've not asked it, what do you want to be? I've asking, what do I want it to be? And while that's a good question, that's not as good a question as divorcing myself personally from it and embracing what this work, this piece of art, what does it want to be? Brilliant question, Mario.
Well, I'm working on another, what do you want to be, that we're pretty much done with the first phase. There's people in Hollywood that, like you, have believed in my message, in Journey Back into the Vault, a message of reconciliation, of peace, of finding yourself, and by finding yourself in others, right? We're not so different, after all. So they went out, they called me I flew to Hollywood, and they started, with my permission, to bring in a director. His name is Tibor Takacs. You can look him up. The lady that's heading the whole thing is an Academy Award winner for The Hunt for Red October, Cecilia Hall. And so right now, after 1 year of them working on it, we have a movie script. We have a filmmaker in Canada that is ready to
Oh,
go.
really?
And asking
A movie or a documentary?
a movie, a full feature-length Hollywood movie, big screen, Hollywood.
Really?
The old days. Why? Because we ask ourselves, what does it want to be? It's a story that takes place mostly in the 1950s. So the vehicle by which we produce it has to be a 1950s vehicle, so that you can begin to understand the times around this child who's trying to find them, just like you are inside the movie theater, right? And at the same time, the last question we asked ourselves a few weeks ago is, where do we want to film it? And everyone said it needs to be authentic. It needs to be filmed in Cuba.
Can you do that?
Oh, yes. Yes, we can. Of course you can. You need to follow their laws as you follow our laws.
Right.
So right now we got everything done. We're ready to go film. We need investors, and that's what we started to do now, is we started to physically send out invitations to investors to be a part of it. We have been sending out invitations to agents on their actors. They're all A-listers. I will only take A-listers. We all will. Cecilia is going to work with an A-lister. So is Tibor. Tibor has already directed like 70 movies in Hollywood. These are all Hollywood people. They're not your corner movie maker. These are for real, right? So we're waiting for this negotiations with Cuba to hopefully end someday. This book is going to really help. I'm already, next week, I'm going to be interviewed by Channel 4, CBS network. I'm going to be interviewed by Mega TV, which is from Spain, and is seen all over the Spanish-speaking world. And all these interviews that I'm doing, I'm going to Guadalajara, to the book fair with this book. I'm going to Cali in Colombia, and everything is going to be talking about, this book remind us what worked between Cuba and the US, and maybe try to make it happen again. It was a wonderful
congratulations on all your success. This is wonderful.
Yeah, but
and I'm sure you had no idea from your book that it would be a film.
No, that's the what do you want to be now, right?
What does it want to be?
Right.
The story wants to be a film now.
So now it's just falling on my lap that all these, national and international networks want to hear from me about this book.
Congratulations.
They see what I see. They see that this
great.
book is almost like an outline of what it could be, and hopefully will form part of the negotiations, so that we can then go film this movie in Cuba, make it authentic, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
We're
Make
not
it
going
a
to
true story.
We're not going to paint over anything. What's good is good. What's bad is bad. It don't matter. That's the truth. It's authentic, right?
Well, congratulations, Mario. I'm very happy for you. You deserve it. You've worked hard. And I want to thank
anyone who would want to be a contributor to this.
Okay. Okay. We've got links on the show notes so people can check in. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. What a delight having you. And I also want to thank everybody for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.